Mike, you're very welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Great to be here. It was cool video. I recognised quite a few of the faces on there.
Good. Just one request, Mike. If you could put your device on mute because we're getting an echo.
Right.
You've got a playback going on.
Is that me? I can't think what that would be. So I've got my sound, both sound on my set to my. Let me turn that.
Okay. Okay. I think we're good now, Mike. Hopefully. So, Mike. So, yeah, there's still a delay. There's still some problem. Yeah. So let me just. Okay. Problems on my side actually. So off we go. Here we go. Action replay. Mike, welcome. So I've got your Agendashift 2nd edition book here, and really enjoyed reading it. I so good at I actually read it twice. And Mike, I'm curious why you decided to write a 2nd edition. It feels like the 1st edition was only yesterday. You're on mute at the moment, Mike.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Okay. And now we've got the echo back. So I think I'm on. Has it got 2 devices going? Apologies for this.
No problem.
Let's make it.
So while Mike is doing that, I'll just say one of the things that really struck me in the book was on page 39, he's got a Lean-Agile inspired True North.
Yes.
And it's really, really nice. I'll read it out for everybody if you haven't actually read the book yet. So imagine everyone able to work consistently at their ideal best. Individuals, teams, between teams, across the organization and beyond. The right conversations, the right people, the best possible moment, needs anticipated, met at just the right time. That's a really nice True North.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm really glad you picked that out, because that says quite a bit about how Agendashift works. We're trying very hard to engage people, get people to come up with their own ideas of what they want to happen, both in terms of like business outcomes, in terms of ways of working, all those different kinds of things. And the less prescriptive you can be in your inputs to that process, the better. Now, I kind of worked that out for myself, 2016, 2017, as we were building Agendashift. What I now know as I've connected to other communities, in particular the Dialogic Organization Development community, there's actually some practice and some jargon around all these things. Called generative images. Images, whether it's words or something visual, that challenge people and inspire people, and they leave open a lot of the detail, perhaps even some ambiguity and paradox and so on, and people can read different things into them. Different things that resonates for them in different ways and so on. What was interesting about that True North, it's describing, what I thought it was doing was describing sort of an idealized agile organization or lean agile organization. And if you sort of really sort of analyze the text, you can say, oh yeah, I can see a bit of agile in there, I can see a bit of lean in there. For lean, for example, instead of just in time, we have at the right moment, or and phrases like that, and a sense of collaboration as well, but not just within teams. I wanted to be much more a whole organization thing, so it was crafted quite carefully, very carefully. As I said, that goes back to some of the early days of Agendashift, 2016, 2017. And I had a fascinating experience actually trying it out with clients. I tried it out on a client, so I won't name them, but a well-known non-profit. And for them, it's like cathartic, and I thought it was really strange, And we did an exercise reflecting on it, and they had 10 minutes, and then they wanted another 5 minutes, and then they wanted another 5 minutes. 20 minutes has gone, and they're still just reflecting on this True North. And really wanted to understand what was going on there. And what was extraordinary is that they were an organization with, fantastic from the point of purpose, noble purpose that everyone really bought into, everyone was very motivated by. Yet in terms of ways of working, it just wasn't working for them. The working environment was actually incredibly frustrating for them. And the permission to imagine something better was really amazing for them, which is why they wanted so much time. And then the process continues from there. The ideal reflection, what obstacles get in the way of that, and then what outcomes are, hiding behind those obstacles. We call it the I do pattern now. That's actually one of the reasons for the second edition. We've gelled some of these things crystallized some of these things into sort of patterns that are much more memorable. Ideal, obstacles, outcomes, I do. And the first couple of chapters at least major on that pattern.
Just getting back though to the True North and also the clean language. What really struck me about the True North is the people I've shown this to in organizations where it's quite tough to be agile, really.
Yes.
They received it quite positively, and
yes.
And so the language that you're using doesn't trigger a response. At least that's what I noticed.
Yes,
and I loved.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it doesn't trigger a negative response. I mean, it's just like the same with the assessment as well. We worked really hard to take the jargon out of it, and there's too many assessments that are actually saying more about the assessor than the people being assessed. Well, in fact, we're not even assessing the people. We're assessing how well things are working for them. And by removing the jargon from it, not trying to make it into a teaching tool, or worse, a way of selling a set of best practices, the favorite practices of the consultant. We make it into a much better tool, much more engaging, and it's again, like the True North, the assessment becomes the catalyst, the springboard for some really fantastic conversations, and with that same ideal obstacles outcomes pattern again. Yeah,
so that really comes true to me, because when I look at your, if I look at Chapter 2 Exploration, where you're talking about the Agendashift Delivery Assessment Mini Edition, again, when I read down through some of the suggested questions, no real triggers, really authentic questions. If I take the leadership ones as an example, if you don't mind. Category 6, right? So we strike an appropriate balance between meeting customer needs, improving our delivery process, and developing new capabilities. We recognize improvement areas, take action, and follow through. And we all share responsibly for how we work and how our work is organized. And so what it really feels like to me is there's really no judgment in those words. It's like these are good things to have.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, they are. We write it in we language. It's inclusive. Most of the prompts start with we or our, and then you describe things that we'd expect the majority of people to want to have. And then out of the 18 prompts of the mini assessment or the 42 prompts of the full version, it's up to them actually to prioritize which ones they want to work on, which ones they want to have the conversations on. Going back to those early days, 2016, 2017, what I was trying to build was something non-prescriptive, and one not likely to trigger those negative responses, to generate cynicism and disengagement and all those other things. I wasn't happy with the term non-prescriptive because it doesn't say what it is. It's not something positive. So we landed on outcome oriented. We landed on that in time for the first edition. And then in the foreword to the first edition, Daniel Mesick used the term engagement model, and I suddenly thought, I'm kicking myself. Why didn't I think of that? So, Agendashift is an engagement model. So it's how you, as a leader, as a coach, as a consultant, how you engage with the organization, how you help keep people engaged in the process, how you keep the bits of the organization engaged with each other as it undergoes change and things are pulling in different directions, and all the rest of it. Engagement is, there's sort of two common denominators to that. So one is engagement, and engagement model is just a brilliant term for that. And then the other part is organization. And again, this is kind of another reason for the second edition. We have a much clearer understanding of how organizations work and how how they need to work, how organizations grow their dysfunctions, for example. The whole thing is so much better grounded in the theory, from the systems world and from the organization development world and other places, or complexity world as well. So there's a kind of a confidence to the book as well. Now that we've taken phrases like that and really bottomed them out, really done the research, done the reading, test things out, work out how to make what are sometimes quite challenging concepts, accessible to people. That's something, as a writer and as a teacher, I enjoy doing.
Yeah, it's I can really see that, and one of the things that you mentioned already was, after you look at your true north and you do your assessment, I can see here you're kind of focusing on some of the obstacles maybe to where you're going. So and you talk about good obstacle, bad obstacle.
Yes,
can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. Again, that was another reason for doing the second edition. There's a whole number of places where we've just made some improvements, small and not so small. One of them, actually really important improvements in the second edition, is that exercise good obstacle, bad obstacle, and it's going through the list of obstacles and looking for where obstacles have been framed in bad ways. So where they're framed, they're judgmental. Finger pointing, for example, where they use jargon, and again, using even trying to get people to do things in their own words, and using jargon can even be alienating to other people in the organization. And and it's also very easy to come up with things that sound like obstacles, but really all they're doing is selling a solution. And we're trying to engage people's creativity. Prematurely narrowing down solution space isn't a great idea either. And some obstacles are just platitudes. Our obstacle is that everyone doesn't have the agile mindset. It's not at a level where anybody can sensibly engage. So getting people to think deeply about obstacles, not because we want to sort of dig into them and do root cause analysis or anything like that, but to frame them in a way that's going to make it much more likely, almost guarantee, that you can have some great conversations off the back of them. And it was kind of like debugging. Just 5% of conversations or 10% of conversations didn't work as well as I thought they should have done. The good obstacle, bad obstacle was the mitigation to that. But it turns out that it was actually a really cool exercise with lots of great learning around it in terms of how accidentally, unthinkingly, we use such lazy thinking, judgmental language, and things like that. So we actually do it twice in some of our workshops, and it's hilarious when people fall into the same traps twice running. So it just shows you how easy these traps are to fall into.
And I noticed as well in the exploration piece, it's still in chapter 2 now. After good obstacle, bad obstacle, you had 5 kind of categories, if you like, challenge mapping questions where. If you don't mind me reading them out, Mike, the customer one. Thank you. The customer one was, what's happening when we're reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs, so outside in kind of thinking.
Yes.
Organization, when we're meeting those strategic needs, what kind of organization are we? So how are we serving that?
Yes.
Product, through what products and services are we meeting those strategic needs? Again, outside in thinking. And then you're getting into platform.
Yeah.
So when we're that kind of organization, meeting those strategic needs, delivering those products and services, what are the defining critical capabilities that make it all possible? And then finally with teams, when we're achieving all the above, what kind of teams are we? So how long did it take you to come up with those questions? They're pretty short, precise questions.
When I came to do it, I knew I wanted an outside-in strategy review. That's what that comes from.
Yeah.
And by that stage, I'd had a lot of practice in recognizing, the hidden assumptions in questions. Agendashift is very well known for its use of clean language. We've been called, a gateway drug to clean language, and I'm actually quite proud of that. But what we try to do with that is there's something I learned from Clean. There's 2 things going on. One is do your utmost to avoid asking questions that are burdened with unnecessary assumptions.
Yeah.
And then you get much more genuine, asking genuine questions that you don't know the answer to, and make the minimum of assumptions, and that makes people free to answer in the way that's most helpful to them. And the second thing is that you're sort of building a model as you go. I mean, with clean language, you're asking these questions, you're sort of exploring a landscape, in the other person's head with these questions, building a model of obstacles and outcomes in Agendashift and 15-minute photo. In this exercise, we start from our relationship with the outside world, our customers in particular, and then we're working our way inwards. And you notice how the questions tend to refer upwards or to refer backwards, and you're kind of encouraging alignment as well as you go. And when you get to the lower levels, it would be surprising if you gave answers that weren't consistent with the answers you were giving for the previous levels. So you're naturally building a nicely aligned, nicely coherent strategy in the process. I mean, there's more to the strategy process than just answering those questions, but they are very good starting points. So there's kind of another generative image kind of built into that first question: meeting the right customers, meeting their strategic needs. And it uses this older phrase, strategic needs. Our strategy, their needs. And there's that nice sort of tension there that helps encourage a little bit of creative thinking.
And I love the next chapter as well, chapter 3 on mapping, where you bring in some really good work as well from Liz Keogh and Carl Scotland.
Yes.
And basing on Kanban framework, and also bringing a bit of twisted wordly mapping. And
brilliant. Yes. I describe it as my favorite innovation of 2019. So we now call it optional relationship mapping. It took us nearly all of 2019 to give it the right name. I mean, I called it reverse Wardley for most of that year, and it used to really wind Carl up, but we didn't have a better name for it. But we met we had dinner at Wagamama's in London and argued over the name. But yes, it's a twist on Wardley mapping. We found people have done experiments with trying to Wardley map with outcomes. I mean, the overlap, there's quite a good overlap between the Agendashift community, the Kanban community, and the Wardley mapping community. And in that intersection is people who wanted to do mapping with outcomes. We already knew that outcomes and the Kanban 4 points exercise worked really well. But outcomes into Wardley mapping, just something off about it. The idea that outcomes fit along a maturity scale just didn't fit, and outcomes don't really form a value chain either. But with Liz and Carl's absolutely brilliant idea is to replace the maturity axis with an ambiguity axis, which is actually quite similar, really. Things that we really know about on one side, things that there's a lot of ambiguity, unknowns, all the rest of it at the other end. String them out along a line. And then stretch them vertically according to how visible the outcomes are to the customer, and then draw arrows where there's one impact outcomes on another outcome. It's not a Wardley map, but it looks a little bit like one. The process is reversed compared with Wardley mapping, but in the end, as a strategy tool, it does some of the same kinds of things. Where do we need to learn more? Where is the low-hanging fruit? If we do this, or where should we choose to concentrate our effort in terms of the accessible things, in order to reach the more important objectives that we're going for? So it does a lot of work of strategy in just one picture. It is brilliant.
Yeah, and what I really loved about it as well is you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said, often when people facilitate some workshop and there's loads of ideas, and then they do some kind of dot voting and they kind of pick, the gold or whatever, but there's still some gold nuggets left on the table, actually.
Well, you're throwing away 90% of the information when you do that. So I try not to do dot voting. I think prioritization is actually really, really important, but try to do it in a way that doesn't lose all the information. I mean, I think a lot of, I think part of it is a lot of coaching is focused on getting to the next commitment. Like with the GROW model, which I'm a fan of, I've got to say, but there's a time and place for these things. So goal, reality, options, way forward, and you tend to narrow down the options to one. But when you're doing strategy work, you want to understand the landscape, and you don't want to throw it away. You're not going to model the landscape and then just plan your next step. That doesn't make any sense. Well, you do need to plan your next step, but you don't want to throw the rest of the landscape away. So with Agendashift, it's much more careful than a lot of other tools in terms of not sort of prematurely converging on the one thing, and it's getting some of that stuff out there, making sure all your decisions are well contextualized and so on.
So essentially, when you have this completed option relationship map, you've got all these stickies, you've got ambiguity going on the horizontal, you've got customer visibility, more visibility up, more visibility below, and so on. And then you put the outcomes on, and then essentially, I'm probably oversimplifying here now, making a dog's breakfast of this.
It's good so far.
Essentially, you're kind of linking the outcomes almost like dependencies, almost like sometimes correlation, sometimes causation between.
Impact. We would call it impact. This outcome impacts on that one. A bit like with OKR. If we're going to achieve this stretching objective, we're going to need to make some very good progress on these key results. It fits very well with OKR.
So were you thinking of system modeling when you did that, or was that just accidental? Because it feels very similar to system modeling, where you can have these different variables and you say, well, if this goes up, that goes up. If this goes up, that goes down, kind of thing. Is that where you were going with that, or was that accidental?
No, definitely not. So we're just trying to find different ways. I mean, we have three different tools that we use in the mapping chapter, but three different ways of representing or organizing outcomes. The Kanban 4 points exercise is very good value at the point that we do it in. Has some great teaching value, but it doesn't really give you clarity on priorities. But it does help you have some helpful conversations. The option relationship map, reverse Wardley, as I used to call it, I think it's a much better visualization of the strategy. And then in terms of like a, getting your ducks in a row, the pathway map, which is really it's basically a story map but with outcomes. It's a simple tool. It's not the most exciting tool, but it does the job in terms of showing the priorities in each of the columns. And actually, as I said before, I love prioritization conversations. When you're forced to put things into a sequence, which the option relationship map does as well. Put it in the ambiguity axis, put it in that customer visibility axis. Start to have some real conversations about this versus that. You're forced then to have some real conversations about what these things actually mean. And at the time the sticky was written down, that might not be clear. And when you go back to your story map, again, remind ourselves, why we're doing this, why is this important? These are good conversations to have.
So just on that kind of story map, right? So at the top, page 96 of the book, second edition, pathway mapping, I can see here you got these headings, and there seems to be very strong links with Kanban University. I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding.
No. So what's one of the few? There's kind of two bits of Kanban that have, three bits of Kanban that still found their way into Agendashift. Agendashift doesn't depend on Kanban at all. But I wrote a good book on Kanban. They're not going to waste that knowledge. The assessment, the headings of the assessment are transparency, balance, collaboration, customer focus, flow, and leadership. And those are actually the names of the first 6 chapters of Kanban from the inside, my Kanban book. And those are taken from my values model for Kanban. So that goes back to introducing Kanban through its values, which is the blog post that changed my career. That's the one that turned into the book, into the first book. The headings that you mentioned, they're from a model called reverse static. So static is the systems thinking approach to implementing Kanban. I gave it the catchy name static. And then I realized it was much more fun backwards. Static is very much a linear process. You do these bits of analysis and then kind of design your Kanban system. I was a bit uncomfortable with that, frustrated with that, and then I realized if you do it backwards, start with the board design you have, and if you don't have one, to do, doing, done, and then the different stages then are ways of refining that design from the point of view of knowledge discovery process, customer service, and so on. I actually used to teach Kanban like that for a while. I don't do Kanban training anymore. But they've become the headings for the pathway map because I needed some headings and those worked.
They seem reasonable. It's almost like Yeah, it also almost reads like a kind of maturity in a way as well, like because you got refining the existing systems and then improving the service experience, like delivering faster, I guess.
Yes.
Then managing the knowledge discovery process, focusing on outcomes, I guess. Balancing demand and capability, then making sure the system isn't overwhelmed. Then addressing sources of dissatisfaction, which for me would be kind of hinting about experimenting to figure out unmet needs and stuff like that,
and dependencies and things like that. Yeah, so it's just those run-of-the-mill things that everyone suffers from.
Yeah.
I also purpose. And pursue
exactly.
Purpose is the last one. So the idea was there needs to be a sense of, it's not, I wouldn't call it maturity, and it's not a maturity model. But there does need to be a sense of progression. If people are looking at the pathway map and thinking this is a story map, and they don't see some sense of progression across the top, some sense of journey, then the heads explode, and that gets messy. I started using transparency, balance, collaboration, the values, and some people were just really uncomfortable with it. And there's no reason why it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work prioritizing the outcomes in those columns. But people responded to it so much better when we changed the column headings. It's one of these just silly little things, but you have to pay attention to how people respond to things like that.
I had Carl Scotland on the show in December explaining the taste X metrics, so we won't go into that in so much detail today, if you don't mind. It was really, really nice. We call it a bonus tool, and I agree with that. It's really nice, very simple, everything on one page, figuring out what you want to do next.
He did a really nice talk last week at the Generative conference and this week at Lean-Agile Global 2021. Bit of a mouthful.
Very nice.
He called it a taste of Agendashift, and he actually did a really nice job of describing, the first couple of chapters worth of Agendashift, and then using his X matrix as a way of on a one pager. Summarizing, kind of the key conclusions of that work, something you could keep referring back to and so on. And it does nicely summarize the strategy, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, in terms of true north and aspirations, and then what are the main strategies that we're pursuing, what are the tactics, towards those strategies, what are the evidence that we're winning, and that's good. I'm really glad I still included it in the second edition, because I did and ah about it. I did find it difficult to use with lots and lots of outcomes, but using it, as Carl describes, as a way just to summarize the key stuff actually was really good, and I have had positive experiences with it as well. So that was in the end a good decision.
So if anybody's interested, just check out my YouTube channel. You'll see that session with Carl. We spent a good hour on it. We walked through his matrix and everything, so it was really nice. We had an example. So if I move forward, Mike, onto chapter 4 in your book, Elaboration, you then you get into challenge mapping revisited, and you brought something in here which I really liked, which is how might we kind of language.
Yes.
Which it was. Is that coming from Google Design Sprints, or where did you get that idea?
Well, it's fascinating actually. Design Sprint has popularized challenge mapping and how might we, but it's actually decades old. It's fascinating doing the digging and coming across traces of the history. I mean, I don't have access to all the original literature, from the, I'm not sure when it was, 60s or 70s, but there are I've seen snippets of stuff. There've been blog posts written. If you go to the on the Agendashift site, there's a page for the I do pattern. And that actually has links to it's an interesting page in its own right, but it has links to some of the stuff on. So on the if you put the I do, change book to I do.
I'll do that.
You'll have that. That's got the some of that history. So what we're doing there, and again, some of the improvements again in the second edition, is making the ideation process a bit more interesting. So challenge mapping, 2 basic questions, which you can tweak them a bit. But why is that important, and what stops that? So, for example, you might be now doing your an ideation around an outcome that you generated months ago. So why is that important? Kind of just reminding yourself why you've chosen this. And what stops us solving that? What stops us achieving that? Why is that important? So on. And so these are generative questions, generative process. You can ask these questions more than once. You can switch between them. You can switch between talking about obstacles and outcomes, and that's just with 2 questions. It's very, very, very clever. The one slightly iffy thing that you can get into if you're not careful is fishing for solutions, and that's something we warn a couple of times against in the book. But if you make sure that when you write these stickies down, they're written down in the form of how might we. It's now how might we address some kind of challenge. That's why it's called challenge mapping. And so that's the sort of the antidote to premature solutionizing, really.
So give some examples here, Mike. So one of them was like, how might we have an idea of timescales for delivery?
Yep.
How might we recognize revenue sooner, for example? Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And
before we get to how might we, I'd be asking, well, why is that important?
Okay.
And there's no point in generating solutions for things that aren't important. And actually, if you ask what stops that, this is obstacles and outcomes again. This is a pattern that occurs just all across Agendashift. It's helping identify the most important obstacles to what you really want, and tackling those.
And then you go into experimentation, and I really like your A3 template, the Agendashift A3 canvas. It's a canvas, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it's so A3. I mean, it goes back to Toyota. There is as many A3 templates as there are lean consultants. Is my joke on that one, and here's mine. But yeah, it's one of my most popular downloads. It kind of has some 21st century twist to it.
Saw that.
Lean startup style hypotheses. The idea of safe to fail, for example. But it's just a template, and you can start with a blank sheet of paper. I think what's more important with A3 than a template is actually the process, of allowing your challenge to be your thinking to be challenged, socializing your experiment before you actually try it, and I'm a big fan of all of that. I wouldn't never get too hung up on templates.
Yeah, you give a few options, to be fair, and you talk about stuff behind the scenes, like using I do and 2MBM combined, and then actually something really caught my attention. Page 132, you said meaning before metric, which really rings a bell for me. Where if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else, right?
Yes.
And I love this next one as well. Measure before method. So
That actually started with a Twitter conversation. That was quite funny. We were looking. It must have been late 2018, and we were designing a new OKR workshop. And I had some questions for who was it for? It was for Larry Maccheroni, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it started as an email conversation. Some of the conclusions of that conversations went on Twitter, and then I got into conversations with other people, and then I just came up with, just for fun, meaning before method, measure before method. And so meaning before metric, it's about the importance of having all the kinds of conversations we've been talking about before you get down to how we will measure them, metrics, all that stuff. And I hate it when consultants lead with their favorite metric, whether it's net promoter score or velocity or lead time or whatever it might be, without actually trying to understand what's important. And if you're in OKR territory, starting with the metric, you're then into target setting and management by objectives, and that can lead you into a very dark place. I mean, just look up management by objectives. You're kind of a few steps away from an accounting scandal if you don't watch it. So that's that bit, and then the measure before method, and this is all part of the ideation process now. Think about all the ways you would measure success, and a bit like with the obstacles, have all of that in the air while you're coming up with solution ideas. So have your obstacles in the air, your measures of success in the air, and even if you're only coming up with like 15% solutions, things that only get you part of the way, that's all helpful. And it may turn out there's no one solution that will solve the problem in its entirety. But it all helps with with the creative stuff. So there's a bit of a bit of design sprint, maybe a bit of design thinking thrown in there. You get stuff in the air, smash things together, see what happens. That's all. So we've made that ideation process a bit more fun than it was in the first edition.
And moving on to chapter 5, then I really liked this chapter. You talk about the generative model and the viable system model. If I just kind of read briefly for the audience, right, the 6 steps of the generative change model, which you're saying is a more recent. Yeah. And so the 6 steps: identify the adaptive challenge, reframe into a possibility-focused purpose statement. I like that, possibility-focused. Engage diverse stakeholders in generative conversations, so like curious, non-judgmental conversations, and adaptive, I guess. Stimulate self-organized innovations by probing, like experiments. Learn from successes and failures, and then scale up and embed successful probes, and basically de-emphasizing the other ones, and then rinse and repeat.
Yes.
It's really,
so
really
that's
nice.
I mentioned earlier, we've been digging some deeper foundations in the last couple of years. So that model is by Jervis Bush, who's one of the co-authors of the original Dialogic Organization Development book. He's a professor out in Canada. He gave the closing keynote at our conference last week. Fantastic speaker. But what was extraordinary, I read the Dialogic OD book initially, and I was just really excited. Oh, there's people who think the same way I do. We got very, very excited. And then the book, The Dynamics of Generative Change, is a very small book. It's a 100-page book. He's got a series of books that are just exactly 100 pages long. But that model I could cross-reference with Agendashift, and it was like one-to-one. I'm thinking, oh wow, here from academia is a model that describes how Agendashift works, and I thought that was just awesome. And we're now in conversation. I was thrilled that he wrote a good book review on Amazon for the book. He did the keynotes, closing keynotes at our conference. But that was that was very exciting to discover a community from well outside of Agile. I criticize Agile repeatedly for ignoring progress in organization development in the last 20 years. And sticking to 1990s models of change, those sort of linear models of overcoming resistance and all that kind of nonsense. And it's actually some really fantastic things happening in the OD world in the last 20 years. And I'm doing my bit to try and connect the Agile community to that stuff.
So I think for a lot of organizations, anyone interested in people and change, page 144, there's a summary of those 6 steps in a circle. And I'm fairly deep into change as well, and I've been researching this for years, and I have to say this would be one of the kind of more fit for purpose models that I've seen, actually. And then Mike, you go into the viable system model. I really love this as well, because you talk about 6 different systems, and essentially what you're talking about is kind of keeping various themes connected. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is I'm really heartened to hear that response. I mean, the viable system model has been knocking around since the 70s. It's like probably the pinnacle of the management cybernetics community. So Stafford Beer, clearly a genius. But the model is a little bit hard to get your head around. It's a fractal model. So it's, you have viable systems inside viable systems, people, teams, organizations, industries, countries. They've all been analyzed using the viable system model. It's a really powerful diagnostic tool. But because of its sort of fractal nature, and because Stafford Beer was very careful not to name his systems, because to kind of mislead you into thinking what you should expect, or how they should work, and he just called them system 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then he realized he missed one, so that became 3-star. So you can see this is actually not that easy to get into, and I've done my utmost to make it accessible without dumbing it down, in a way that's sort of respectful of the sources. And so a lot of the new work this year, in the run up to the book, and also after the book, is around what I call a deliberately adaptive organization, which is basically Agendashift plugged into the viable system model to bring it to life, to make those very abstract, even unnamed terms, more concrete, and use it as a way to understand things like scaling challenges, use it to explain how a strategy deployment works, explain how relationships between levels in the organizations need to work, and so on. And actually explain, for all of us that have various levels or forms of discomfort with scaled agile, viable systems model is a brilliant diagnostic tool to understand why that is, why they have the tendencies that they have. But on the positive side, some of the things that you could do to help mitigate those problems. And if you're a big believer in autonomy, big believer in autonomous teams, big believer in things like intent-based leadership and so on, that model, and particularly the deliberately adaptive model in the Agendashift book, will give you a lot of clues to how to reconcile that with scaled delivery process. And I kind of the disappointment of the last few years for me is that we're scaling up process and thinking that's going to lead to wonderful things without paying attention really to the fundamentals of how organizations work and how people work and so on. And so that might sound harsh, but when you look at the dysfunctions that you see and actually have some sound reasons for those dysfunctions, I feel quite justified in saying them.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me, I couldn't help kind of thinking about the Spotify communicated approach. And so they have got, the tribes and guilds and chapters and all that kind of stuff. And in sociocracy, you bring in circles.
Yeah.
So self-governing circles, and that really rings a bell with me because I've often tried to get communities of practice going, and some of them go really well, and then some genius might decide to join two of them together, and then they die.
Yes.
Because because of efficiency, but actually that we lost the ethos. So that really rings for me. So essentially, forgive the pun.
So I think the deep magic of the Spotify model, if ever had magic, is actually quite well explained by sociocracy. The idea that people can belong to circles, which is like the generic name for a group of people who are there by consent and who are self-governing by consent. And people can belong to more than one circle. That's almost all the rules of sociocracy. I mean, it is that simple, but it's one of these beautifully simple, powerfully simple things. Once you've understood sociocracy, then you'll look at models like sociocracy and models like Spotify, for example, in a rather different light. Then the viable system model is the model for any system that has identity and the desire to thrive in a changing environment. I think just so let that settle for a moment. But and when we're trying to pursue things like business agility and scaled agile and so on, I think you'll be a fool not to pay some attention to that model and what it has to say. Yeah. So deliberatelyadaptive.org. That's Agendashift plugged into the viable system model. Essentially, is what we're doing in those last couple of chapters. Yeah.
And I noticed another kind of acronym on page 188 was deliberately developmental organization, DDO.
Yes. So deliberately adaptive, and if you go to that site, you'll see this. It's a deliberately adaptive. It's a model for every scale, including the smallest possible scale. Individuals or small people relating to each other.
Yeah.
And the inspiration actually for the name Deliberately Adaptive Organization is Robert Keegan, Lisa Lasko Leahy wrote a good book called
Immunity to Change. Yeah.
What's the name of the book?
I think it's Immunity to Change.
No, it was the same author's different book. But the model is a deliberately developmental organization. It's called An Everyone Culture. That's the name of the book. An Everyone Culture.
Okay.
So it's a culture in which you are helped to grow in your role. You are helped to find, where things you might grow into or move into. You are helped to step outside, kind of step outside the system and look at your relationship with the system as a way of understanding how you might change or how the system might change. It comes from actually those sort of models of those developmental models, the sort of maturity models of human development. I'm not a fan of maturity models myself, but there's also this kind of systems thinking way of looking at it. How does your organization help people grow in their roles into new roles? How does it help the organization help each other? Look at the system, look at their relationships, and so on. And it was just a really nice model to finish on, where we take what we're doing at the higher organizational levels and bring it down to a much more humane kind of level. So I was really pleased to be able to basically finish the book about there. Not much after there.
So Mike, we've gone through the book. So that was the fastest we've ever went through the Agendashift book. There's a podcast as well on it, but I think we kind of went a bit deeper this time. But I wanted to talk to you about the conference, Mike, because you had your first Agendashift conference last week. How did it go?
It was really brilliant. We had more than 400 registrations. I think if we'd left the window open a bit longer, we probably would have got to 500. We actually had people saying, can we still sign up? It was really great. It was our first Agendashift conference. I wasn't actually even up for doing it. Other people said, Mike, it'd be great to do a conference to help launch the book. We had enough speakers to do 2 tracks. We had an Agendashift track and a transformation track. We had Pia Maria Torren, I think you might know, and Professor Jervis Bush do the opening and closing keynotes. And it was great for me. I did it like an introductory talk just to get things started. But it was fascinating watching the talks on the Agendashift track and hearing other people talk about this stuff, and actually enjoying what I was hearing. So that was cool.
That's good.
And then a transformation track where we a little bit broader, going into related spaces. I mean other communities that intersect with Agendashift that we learn from and help them understand what we're up to. It was online with pre-recorded talks, which I was a little bit nervous about, but actually we had a great stream of chat going as the talks were progressing. Every speaker was there live with a host, and some of the sessions ended up on Zoom afterwards as well. And we've now got a library of some recordings. So Next is working on making those available to people that didn't originally attend the conference. So a really great experience. I blogged about it. It would have been late last week. I said Agendashift came of age. On Tuesday. It just felt like Agendashift finally this year. Finally, Agendashift has got a life of its own. There are things happening in Agendashift land that weren't instigated by me, and where other people were doing most of the work, and that is just so fantastic.
Just on other people doing most of the work, you also have an academy, although you did the recordings, obviously, but you have circles of people actually putting together an online learning platform for Agendashift. Is that right?
Yes. So two of our partners, there's one partner in particular, but him and his colleague are both partners. But Kjell-Tore Guttormsen and myself, we describe ourselves as the co-founders of the academy. And it's a really good relationship. He's responsible for the platform. I'm responsible for the content at the moment. And we've done a self-paced training course called Leading with Outcomes. So the first few, it's been going a few weeks. The first few participants are have finished it or coming towards the end of it. And the feedback has been really, really good. And it's the first of 3 sort of main courses I want to do. So Leading with Outcomes it's the first 2 chapters of the book. It's exploration and discovery. You do the clean language stuff, 15-minute photo, You do good obstacle, bad obstacle. You do celebration 5W. All the tools that people remember Agendashift for. Then we're going to do an outside-in strategy course. So we'll do the strategy review. We'll do the outside-in delivery review as well as an alignment and performance and review. And we'll get into things like OKR and tight, loose, tight, and other sort of related disciplines. And then a third one is going to be transforming with outcomes. That's going to be really based on the deliberately adaptive organization. The serious sort of organizational stuff is going to be in that last one, and we'll have those three together will add up to something bigger and better than the original 2-day deep dive workshop. But it's self-paced, so people can do it in their own time at their own pace, with a selection of live interactive workshops to complement them. So those are still going. There are a number of sort of 2-hour, 2.5-hour, or 2 sessions thereof workshops. Coaching with outcomes. That's we'll have fun with 15-minute photo on Zoom. That's coaching with outcomes. The mapping workshop, the probe workshop, which is the ideation and experimentation stuff, and so on. So we got a roadmap for the curriculum, and we should be able to deliver all of that. We think this year, and a new assessment tool for the deliberately adaptive organisation as well as kind of to feed into that last thing. So we've got some work to do. It's not just some of it is just recording. Some of it also is actually developing new tools and new exercises around them. And I've even been asked to write another book. I can't really tell you who by or what it's going to be yet, but I've got a lot to do this year. And I think I described 2021 as the year not to waste. I thought we're lots and lots of reasons. Coming out of the pandemic, the second edition of the book, replatforming, all those kind of things, and then we're even starting to get these circles of partners, focusing on different things as well. So very, very, very exciting time for us. I'm having quite a ride this year.
God, long may it last, Mike.
Thank you,
Mike. With that, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you coming along.
It's been my pleasure. It's great to talk to you again.
Good stuff. You can hang on there, Mike. Talk in a minute. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Perfect.
Good.